The observation deck of the Galactic Council station hummed with its usual sterile efficiency. Xavier stood before the transparent aluminum viewport, watching the rescue shuttle dock with practiced precision. Behind him, Ambassador Penelope reviewed the incident report on her datapad, her expression unreadable. 17 Kryn juveniles, she said quietly, separated from their colony ship during a meteor shower. They've been drifting for 6 standard days. Xavier turned from the viewport. The Kryn don't exactly warm up to humans, do they? Penelope's lips curved into a sad smile. Their species considers emotional displays a weakness. They're predators, Xavier. Apex hunters on their homeworld. Showing fear or vulnerability goes against everything their culture teaches. They're children, Xavier countered. Cubs, Penelope corrected. And traumatized ones at that. The docking sequence completed with a pneumatic hiss. Through the reinforced glass, they could see the rescue team emerging. A mix of Galactic Council representatives, medical personnel, and security officers. And behind them, huddled together in a defensive cluster, came the Kryn cubs. They were smaller than Xavier had expected, barely reaching his waist. Their iridescent scales caught the station's artificial lighting, shifting through anxious patterns of deep blue and violet. Each cub bore the distinctive triple-ridge crest of their species, though these were still soft and undeveloped. Their eyes, large, golden, and far too alert for children who'd just survived an ordeal, scanned the observation deck with predatory wariness. The lead Kryn cub, a female with particularly bright scales, stood at the front of the group. She bared her teeth in what the Kryn considered a threat display, though Xavier could see the slight tremor in her clawed hands. They're trying so hard to be brave, Penelope whispered. Ambassador Tlock, a towering Viridian with crystalline skin, approached the cubs with formal greeting gestures. The cubs responded with aggressive posturing, their small bodies rigid with tension. Standard protocol demanded they be escorted to the medical bay for evaluation before being transferred to the Kryn consulate. But Penelope wasn't watching the Viridian ambassador. She was watching the cubs, really watching them. The way their scales flickered with stress patterns. The way they pressed against each other for comfort while pretending independence. The way the smallest one in the back kept his eyes squeezed shut, opening them only when he thought no one was looking. Xavier saw the moment Penelope made her decision. He'd worked with her long enough to recognize that particular set of her shoulders. Penelope, he started. She was already moving. The observation deck fell silent as the human ambassador walked past the official greeting party. Protocol officers exchanged alarmed glances. Tlock raised a crystalline hand in warning. But Penelope continued forward, her movements slow and deliberate, until she stood just a few meters from the cubs. The lead female cub's threat display intensified. She hissed, a sound that should have been intimidating but came out more like a frightened kettle. Penelope lowered herself to her knees, bringing herself to the cub's eye level. The simple gesture sent ripples of confusion through the assembled officials. Humans didn't kneel for anyone. It wasn't their way. They were the species that had survived everything their death world threw at them, that had clawed their way to the stars through sheer stubborn determination. And yet here was their ambassador, kneeling on the cold deck plating before a group of traumatized alien children. "I know you're scared," Penelope said softly in perfect Kryn. "I know you've been taught that showing fear is weakness, that predators don't cry, that survivors must be strong." The lead cub's aggressive posture faltered slightly. "But you know what humans learned," Penelope continued. "We learned that the bravest thing isn't pretending you're not scared. It's admitting when you need help. It's accepting comfort when it's offered." She opened her arms, not in a gesture of dominance or control, but in simple, universal invitation. "You've been so brave," Penelope said, her voice cracking slightly. "You survived 6 days in the dark. You kept each other safe. You did everything right. But you don't have to be brave anymore. Not right now. Not if you don't want to be." For a long moment, nothing happened. The observation deck held its collective breath. Xavier could see the conflict playing out across the cubs' faces. Generations of cultural conditioning warring against desperate, primal need. The smallest cub in the back broke first. He let out a sound that was half sob, half keen, and stumbled forward. His carefully maintained threat posture collapsed as he ran into Penelope's arms. She caught him against her chest, one hand cradling his crested head, whispering soothing nonsense in a mix of Kryn and human languages. The dam broke point one by one. The cubs abandoned their brave facades. They rushed forward, scales flickering wildly through patterns of fear and relief and desperate, aching need. Penelope gathered them in, arms spreading impossibly wide to accommodate as many as she could reach. The ones who couldn't fit directly in her embrace pressed against those who could, forming a pile of scales and claws and trembling small bodies. The lead female was the last to surrender. She approached slowly, pride and need warring in her golden eyes. When she finally collapsed against Penelope's shoulder, the sound she made was heartbreaking. A combination of exhausted relief and the keen of a child who'd been trying to be an adult for far too long. Xavier watched, his throat tight, as Penelope rocked the cubs gently. She was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she held these alien children who'd been trying so desperately to act like warriors when all they'd needed was to be held. Around the observation deck, the assembled officials stood in stunned silence. This wasn't in any diplomatic handbook. There was no protocol for this level of raw, vulnerable humanity. Ambassador Tlok approached slowly, her crystalline features reflecting something that might have been understanding. The Kryn they will have questions about this approach. Let them ask, Xavier said quietly, stepping forward to stand beside his colleague. Let them ask why their cubs stopped being afraid when a human held them. Let them ask why children who'd been taught that vulnerability is death felt safe enough to cry. Through the viewport, more Kryn officials were arriving. The cubs' family members, their scales shifting through patterns of anxiety and relief. But as they entered the observation deck and saw their cubs in Penelope's arms, something shifted, because humans understood something that many species had forgotten in their climb towards civilization. That sometimes strength isn't about standing tall. Sometimes it's about kneeling down. Sometimes the bravest thing anyone can do is open their arms and catch whoever's falling. And in that moment, as Penelope held 17 small aliens who tried so hard to be brave, the galaxy learned what humans had always known. That love doesn't require you to be fearless, it just requires you to care more about someone else's fear than your own.